Greetings. With all the talk of a recession and the removal of quantitative easing and other liquidity that was disproportionately helping the technology sector, it is important for us to look at not just the publicly traded tech companies and an index of those, such as the NASDAQ 100, which is the 100 biggest tech companies, but an index of all the private technology companies worldwide, not US only, worldwide, that have valuations above 1 billion. And to do that, we go to this unicorn list over here. Now, what are the instructions for looking at this unicorn list? Well, we go back to the first video of this type that I made in January of 2022 for the basic instructions. So we go over there for about 3.5 minutes. Now, one of the themes of this channel is to provide people with finance education, but not just personal finance, but also high finance. And in this case, finance of the tech industry. Everyone knows how much money the tech industry is making. So here's your opportunity to learn about things that you cannot easily learn from the internet from a Silicon Valley veteran such as myself, who is kind of in the epicenter of all of these things. You know, I teach at Stanford University and am involved in some of the hottest startups. So what is a unicorn company? It's a rather odd name if you think about it. But a unicorn company is one that a few years ago was designated as being a private company, a private tech company, that has more than $1 billion in value. Now, at that time, $1 billion was still relatively large, and I'm talking as recently as 2012, 2013. Since that time, that is a relatively common thing, and all sorts of companies that truly have nothing in the way of a functional product, let alone significant revenue, often have valuations at or above this level simply because they represent an outside chance of achieving a really big disruption, and I'm going to talk about that. So at the moment, you see this list of CB Insights unicorn companies, and this is of course going to be in the description box below, and it is a worldwide list, as every such list should be. And the total number of unicorn companies worldwide is 981, and the total cumulative valuation is 3.22 trillion. Now remember, this number continues to rise, but there's a lot of graduation out of this list. When a big private company has an initial public offering, an IPO, and goes public, then it actually comes off of this list. So companies such as Airbnb, Uber, Palantir, Snowflake Computing, Zoom, and a whole host of others were on this list and near the top of this list, and they graduate out of this list, which therefore reduces the cumulative valuation of the private company roster by that amount. So a few $1 trillion has graduated out of this list, and new ones continue to graduate out of it as IPOs continue to happen all the time. IPOs slow down when there is a market correction, of course, and the valuation of many of these companies will get revised downward. They have what is known as a high beta, in that they rise more than the market when the market is rising, and they fall more than the market when the market is falling. But as you know, we are in an age of the atom thesis, where quantitative easing is absorbed by technological deflation, and whenever there's a market correction, they keep having to do more quantitative easing just to keep up with that exponential gradient. So a lot of downturns will be shorter, at least in calendar time, than one has previously seen. And that is my expectation. We'll see how that shakes out. So onto this list. It's in descending order, and you can see here the company name, the valuation at most recent pricing. Remember, a lot of these companies only get a pricing change every 6 to 12 months or so at the time of a new funding round or other significant event. They don't change their value every day like a publicly traded stock. The date they joined this unicorn list, so the date on which they crossed $1 billion in valuation, and this date is interesting because we can see how quickly they went above 1 billion versus not. There's considerable variation in that. The country, the city, industry, and select investors. And to watch the rest of that video, you can click on this link up here in this tag. Now, as we saw at that time, the number of unicorn companies was about 981, and the total combined market cap was about 3.2 trillion. And now both numbers are higher. There are 1,178 unicorns now, and $3.833 trillion of valuation among them. So both numbers are higher. Now here's the thing about this index. These are private companies, so they're not priced every day. They get a valuation change once there is a major transaction. And each of them wants their next transaction to result in a valuation increase from a new funding round or whatever. But sometimes when new investors don't want to pay the same, let alone a higher valuation, there is something called a down round, which means that the valuation goes down. Now, these are infrequent events, and that's why some of these companies have the same valuation for 12 months, 18 months. But since there are 1,000+ companies on this list, the combined number is what has a great deal more fluidity. And while there is a lag effect of downward valuation revisions, a lot of that should be underway already if this market is under correction. And remember, this is an indicator that's different than something like the NASDAQ 100 in a couple of different ways, in that it's worldwide, like I said, but also the most successful members of this unicorn list tend to graduate out of this list and go public. So sometimes you see $100 billion of value vanish from this list, not because of something bad happening, but because a company outgrew this list as well. So this list is specifically for a certain window, as was described in that snippet clip that we had earlier. Companies between $1 billion of valuation all the way up to the highest, which happens to be ByteDance at $140 billion, but that are still private companies. The key is that they are private companies. So if the market starts to correct and we go into recession, and the central banks of the world are tightening their liquidity, which they should not be doing, as any longtime viewer of this channel knows, but as they're tightening their liquidity, we should see this number starting to go down. So why is it going up? Is the technology sector decoupling from the rest of the economy? Now, gradually we expect that to occur, but I did not expect that to occur as soon as just 2022, so I'm not going to say that's what's going on over here. The bust could have a longer delay time than we think, because none of these companies wants to admit that their valuation has to come down by about half in order to get new funding, because that will happen in some cases, and once that happens to the entire combined list, then you see downward revisions in this value. And some of these that have high valuations in the billions of dollars will even go bust simply because they cannot fund existing operations. But it's also interesting to note that this number has risen, the combined value of all tech unicorns has risen this much, while cryptocurrency is currently in a bust. Cryptocurrency combined prices have fallen by 2/3, from $3 trillion to just $1 trillion now. So cryptocurrency has lost 2/3 of its value. Now, cryptocurrency is not tech companies, whereas these are tech companies that are producing real products and have workers working at them, tens or even hundreds of thousands of workers combined working at all of these companies. But nonetheless, they cater to a very overlapping group of investors potentially. And while these big private companies cannot take small individual investors in the way that cryptocurrency can, they're still drawing from the same general type of investor in terms of their mindset and their investing philosophy in some ways. Although I don't recommend crypto to average people, I've been very clear about that. So don't think that I am advocating crypto in any way for average people. Average people should not be mixed up there. So as we go down this list, you can always search by countries. You can do a Control F for United States and see how many of the 1,178 companies are in the United States. You can do one for China, but you will find the word China in a lot of the investor names as well, like Sequoia Capital China, Sequoia Capital China. So you have to only take some fraction of the instances of finding China as a word under a Control F search to see how many there are for China. But then you can look for smaller countries as well. Australia, how many are in Australia? United Kingdom, how many are in the United Kingdom? This will tell you about the state of innovative tech companies in those countries, and a lot of interesting data points come from there. The big names are ones you're already familiar with, and the valuation of these companies has not changed that much from the prior video, if you happen to notice that. ByteDance, $140 billion, SpaceX, $127 billion. Not a whole lot of change. Databricks is still $38 billion. But other ones have experienced substantial change. And always keep an eye on this date joined, because that tells us how much time it took for them to go from 1 billion to this number that you see here. In the case of ByteDance, just a little over 5 years to go from 1 billion to 140 billion. In the case of Stripe, about 8.5 years to go from 1 billion to 95 billion. But then there are ones that are much less impressive, and certainly some companies that have fallen off of this list as well. There used to be a company called WeWork that was very high on this list. It had a valuation of 47 billion. Then COVID hit and the work from home revolution became entrenched, and WeWork has much less demand than it used to have before COVID. So there's a lot of information that can be teased out from looking at this list. And again, I encourage everyone to look at the original video that goes into detail about how to examine an individual company. If you know someone working at a company on this list, or if you're interested in a job in a company on this list, see that video for instructions about how to use this list for your benefit and go from there. Now, if you like this type of content and would like to see more videos of this type, then I encourage you to subscribe to this channel and hit the notification bell. Thank you very much for watching.